The tape shouldn't exist. The patient was pronounced dead at 3:17 a.m., confirmed by 2 doctors, digitally recorded, filed, signed and sealed. But at 3:41 a.m., the camera in hallway 5B, St. Enoch Medical Center's isolation zone, captured the same man walking alone to the service elevator. I saw the recording, not a report, not a screenshot, the full recording, in 480p with the date flashing in the bottom corner, 05/14/2013. He wore the same hospital gown, his feet bare, his body hunched over, and something about the way the light hit him felt off. It didn't illuminate him, it deflected. I was just a journalist investigating disappearances in rural hospitals. A trivial case, until the Enoch County coroner showed me the double report, confirmed death and subsequent sighting. He thought it was human error, a name overlap, perhaps a glitch in the surveillance system. But as we watched the video together, the air conditioning stopped working. The screen flickered. For a moment, his face, the dead man's, seemed to stare directly into the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. I returned to the newsroom with the flash drive. I tried to analyze the video frame by frame. Each time I paused, the digital clock in the corner shifted position. 1 pixel to the right, then 2 up, as if the date itself were moving. When I exported the video to another format, the duration changed from 0:04:22 to 0:04:19. 3 seconds were missing. No editing program showed any error, and yet the timeline was still incorrect, as if the event were trying to escape analysis. I looked up the patient's hospital records, name Elias Monroe, 52, admitted for heart failure. The death report described a sudden arrest at 3:17 a.m., no vital signs after 3:19 a.m. And yet in the recording, 22 minutes later, he was breathing. I looked at the monitors in the background, all off except one which displayed a solid straight line, a dead line, and yet he was moving. It was as if reality had failed to synchronize with its own timeline. The security supervisor, a quiet man named Warren, met me in the parking lot as I tried to leave. He said that camera, the one in hallway 5B, had been disabled in 2011 after an electrical fire. There's been no power in that section since then, he said. You shouldn't have that file. I pocketed the flash drive. The wind was still, but the parking lot lights flickered as if something heavy was passing between them, invisible. That night, I tried to sleep at the motel down the road. The refrigerator sounded like an old VHS tape, with that magnetic buzz between channels. At 2 a.m., the room phone rang once. No one answered. But the hospital number flashed on the display, 402-5555-0789. I hadn't left my contact information there, and when I called back, the line went dead. Very static-filled silence. In the morning, I called Enoch County Dispatch. I requested access to the night shift cameras. They said the system had been replaced in 2012, all previous files deleted by protocol. That's impossible, I replied. I have a recording from 2013. The operator was silent for a few seconds, then murmured, Sir, St. Enoch Medical Center closed in 2011 after the fire, and hung up. I watched the recording again on my laptop. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The digital clock behind Elias Monroe read 3:41:17, the same minute he supposedly walked out of the hallway. But the recording counter read 3:12:04. Time moved in different directions. As the video progressed, the clock on the wall returned. The image seemed to breathe. I pressed pause just as Elias looked at the camera. For a moment, I thought the screen had frozen. But then I noticed a reflection behind him, someone holding the camera. The perspective was impossible. The system was fixed to the ceiling. And yet a human shadow filmed him, as if the recording were a re-recording. The file seemed to have a consciousness of its own, as if it remembered having been watched before. I made one last note in my notebook. If the hospital was closed in 2011, where does the flashing fluorescent light in the video at 3:41 come from? When I turned off the screen, I realized that the reflection in the motel window wasn't mine. He blinked a second before I did. I returned to Enoch County 3 days later. The hospital didn't appear on any recent maps, but the land was still listed in county records. St. Enoch Medical Property, Lot 12A, classified as structurally compromised. A Upon arriving there, the GPS signal completely lost its signal. The asphalt had turned to dust, the vegetation leaning in different directions, as if the wind were blowing from multiple points. The rusted iron sign was still there, half fallen. Emergency entrance, staff only. There was a smell of ozone and concrete dust, the kind of air that feels colder than it should. The parking lot was empty, but there were fresh tire tracks. I went in with a flashlight and a handheld camera. The ground creaked, covered in a fine layer of white dust. Limestone, perhaps, but it resembled ash. The sound of my footsteps echoed with a delay, as if the echo were hesitant. The wall clocks were all stopped at different times. 3:41, 2:56, 3:41, 3:41. The replay was starting to bother me. 4 clocks, 3 broken at the same minute Elias died. In the administrative area, I found metal cabinets still sealed with Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, tape. Documents dated 2012, even though the hospital had ceased operations in 2011. On the papers, a doctor's initials, Dr. Monroe, Elias H.I., stared at the name. Same last name, the dead man and the doctor. The signatures were identical. The spelling of the E curved in the same way. I felt the non-existent air conditioning blow cold on my back, as if the building were breathing. I recorded a voice note. The structure is intact, but the time seems off. The date on the documents contradicts the closure. The deceased's name appears as the attending physician. My words echoed twice, once on the recorder, once in a slightly lower tone, coming from the hallway. I thought it was the sound feedback, but the recorder was on headphones. The second voice repeated attendant, with a half-second delay, almost mimicking my hesitation. The tape recorded it. I listened to it later. In the basement, I found what remained of the server room, disconnected racks, melted cables, and a row of CRT monitors still flashing a dim green light. None were plugged in. One displayed a frozen blue screen with incomplete text, Monroe Proc, executing restore. I tried to take a picture, but the camera shut itself off. When I turned it back on, the display showed an impossible date. 05/14/2013, 3:41 a.m., the same time as the original recording. The photo was empty, just the glow of the screen and the outline of a missing silhouette. I left the basement feeling like I'd spent more time down there than I actually had. My wristwatch said 47 minutes had passed. The camera's timer said 12 minutes. Outside, the sun was already setting. The sky seemed off, a depthless orange, as if it were a static projection. The streetlights on the road flickered out of sync, each at a different time, like misaligned heartbeats. I began to feel like the world was experiencing small, imperceptible but cumulative hiccups of reality. At a nearby gas station, the attendant said the hospital was still in operation until last year. When I asked if he had ever seen Elias Monroe, he replied, "The cardiologist. Yes, he lived up there on the hill until a few months ago." He showed an old photo on the wall, the St. Enoch medical staff. In the center, the same face from the recording. Alive, smiling, wearing a doctor's badge. The caption read, 2010 annual staff photo, Dr. Elias H. Monroe. But the name on the death certificate was Elias Monroe, patient, doctor and dead, coexisting. I drove up the hill. There was a light blue wooden house, seemingly abandoned. But the porch was clean, and the mailbox contained newspapers dated 2013, all with the same date, May 15th. The day after the death. Each one had a headline, "Hospital still closed after fire 2 years later." It was as if time had frozen in place and kept repeating its own denial. Every detail was an alternate version of the same story trying to correct itself. That night at the motel, I reviewed the files in chronological order. But each time I rearranged the folders, the system automatically changed the date stamps. Sometimes a file created in 2024 would appear with a date of 2013, as if my computer was synchronizing with a different timeline. I began to suspect that the data wasn't corrupted. The modification time itself was being rewritten, as if someone or something wanted the wrong version to prevail. The last sound I recorded that night was a distant clock ticking erratically. When I slowed the audio down, I realized the rhythm formed a Morse code pattern, R-E-S-T-O-R-E, I didn't sleep. The wind outside sounded like a tape rewinding over the E. Next few days, everything began to feel slightly out of sync. At the hotel, the digital clock on the bedside table read 8:02 a.m., while the one on my phone said 7:56 a.m. In the hallway, the CRT television in the reception area repeated the same newscast from 3 days ago, with the same words, the same pauses, the same reporter stepping in the same puddle. When I asked the receptionist if the video was old, she replied confused, "Sir, this is the live channel." The date in the corner of the screen flickered intermittently between 2013 and 2025, as if the signal itself wasn't sure when it existed. I returned to the files on my laptop. The folders were different. One of them, security footage, now contained 5 videos instead of 1, all with the same name, Cam 05B03, 41 AM. Each file was exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds long, but no two were identical. In one, Elias Monroe walks out the door and disappears into the darkness. In another, he stops and looks back, as if noticing me. In a third, he simply dissolves, pixel by pixel. I compared frame by frame. The shadows on the walls shifted. The hospital in the videos seemed to move around him. I showed the footage to an image restoration technician in Omaha. He thought it was a residual loop, a term for recordings that undergo magnetic overlay. But when he paused the second video, it went silent. The reflection of the glass in the hallway window showed someone filming, but it wasn't a security camera. It was a person holding the same model of camera I was using. He zoomed in until the face formed, and there I was. Same jacket, same expression, standing behind the glass as if I'd been there all along. I returned to the motel with shaking hands. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, a physical similarity. But in the folder on my own camera's SD card, there was now a new file. Name, Monroe, Restore Log. The contents were unreadable, except for a single line repeated dozens of times. Elias H. Monroe. Process not terminated. I don't know where it came from. The camera was offline without Wi-Fi, and the card had never been connected to the technician's computer. The file simply appeared, as if it had returned from another instance of reality. I began noticing strange details about myself. In the mirror, my reflection would sometimes flash a frame before me. One night, while washing my face, I saw my reflection take a second to lower its hands. The sound of the water seemed distorted, slower, like a reprocessed recording. I tried to film the mirror with my phone, but the video would freeze the instant I looked up. When I finally managed to record, the reflection didn't show the bathroom, just the hospital hallway, with the fluorescent light flashing at 3:41 a.m. I also noticed that the name on my driver's license had changed. I had always been Daniel H. Lorne, but now the document read Daniel H. Monroe. The font was identical, the official seal authentic. I checked it against my digital files. They all still said Lorne. It was as if the physical and digital worlds had different versions of me coexisting. I called the local Department of Motor Vehicles. The clerk said the system hadn't registered anyone with my original last name since 2013. "Are you sure it's not a typo?" I asked. She replied, "The system doesn't make mistakes with dates, sir, only people do." I began reviewing my old notes. Some sentences were misspelled, as if someone had edited my handwriting. One passage read, "The doctor died before he was born." Another, written in ink identical to mine, continued, "But he hasn't finished what he started." I didn't remember writing that. I flipped through the notebook and found repeated pages, as if the same day had happened more than once. Each date appeared twice, May 14th, May 14th, May 14th. And each time the same time, 3:41 a.m. Sometimes when I walked down Enoch County's Main Street, people seemed to recognize me. A woman at the cafe called me Dr. Monroe. Another, an elderly man, asked if I would return to work at the hospital. I tried to explain that I was a journalist, not a doctor, but their expressions didn't change. They just nodded, as if they were listening to the wrong script, waiting for me to return to the correct line. One even said, "You seem different since the incident, doctor. More real." That night, while I was reviewing my notes, my laptop shut down without warning. When I turned it back on, The wallpaper had changed. A photo of hallway 5B. The clock on the wall read 3:41 a.m., and in the background, a blurry figure walked out the door. The image's file name was User Profile JPG. I'd never saved anything with that name. But what really unsettled me was the image's metadata. Author, Elias H. Monroe. I should have left. But the more I tried to escape, the more Enoch County seemed to expand around me. The road leading to the interstate now ended in a roundabout non-existent on the map. When I tried to turn back, the sign read, "Welcome to St. Enoch Medical District." It was as if the hospital were growing, swallowing the space around it, rewriting the county's topography to incorporate itself back into reality, and I started to feel like somewhere along the way I was being included. I tried to prove I still existed outside that county. I got in my car and drove to Omaha, but the more miles I drove, the more the odometer reading on the dashboard decreased. When I stopped for gas, the GPS showed St. Enoch County, 0.3 Mykonos. It was impossible. I had driven over 100 miles. I asked the attendant where we were, and he replied without thinking, "This has always been St. Enoch. There's nowhere else to go, doctor." The way he called me doctor froze me. He didn't look at me, he seemed to look right through me, as if following a route he couldn't remember memorizing. I returned to the motel and found the room had changed. The furniture was the same but arranged differently. The window was now where the bathroom had been and the mirror was gone. In the closet, someone had left a white lab coat embroidered with Dr. E. Monroe Cardiology. The fabric was new, but the embroidered name was uneven, as if it had been added manually in a hurry. In the inside pocket was a badge, St. Enoch Medical Center, Staff ID 0413, dated 2013. The photo on the badge was mine. From then on, the days began to repeat themselves in varying degrees. Sometimes the sun rose on the wrong side, sometimes the radio played news of events that never happened. One morning, I turned on the TV and saw a newscast reporting on the very investigation I was leading. The anchor mentioned my name, described the security footage and concluded, "Authorities are still searching for answers regarding the reappearance of Dr. Elias H. Monroe, presumed dead 12 years ago." The date at the bottom was 2025. In the corner of the screen, the hospital logo. The same hospital that supposedly didn't exist. I started recording everything, but the tapes didn't maintain consistency. In some, my voice sounded older. In others, younger. One of the audios began with my own name being spoken by a different voice, the same as mine but slightly delayed, like an echo thinking before repeating. When I transcribed it, I noticed that the words changed on their own. "I am documenting a mistake in reality" became "I am the mistake in reality." No digital editor does that. No glitch is so intentional. The bedroom walls began to show signs of repetition. Identical crack marks, as if the same damage had replicated itself across multiple layers of time. Some nights, the sound from the hallway seemed to come from another direction, footsteps that would move away and then return, synchronized with the beating of my heart. A metallic hum began to fill the silence, reminiscent of the sound of a defibrillator before its discharge. At 3:41 a.m., always at this time, all the lights in the room blinked simultaneously, and for a second, the world seemed to restart. I returned to the hospital, or what was left of it, to confront the epicenter. The structure was more intact than last time. The emergency sign glowed in neon, something impossible in a building without power for over a decade. Inside, Corridor 5B was clean, dust-free, as if it was still in operation. In the background, I heard the beeping of cardiac monitors. A familiar but out-of-place sound. On the wall, a new sign, Monroe Restoration Program, authorized personnel only. It was as if the entire hospital had repaired itself. In the main room, I found old computers running. The system displayed a piece of software called Proc Monroe, EXE. At the top of the screen, a line flashed, "Process restoring memory continuity, iteration 41923. The counter was rising on its own. I tried to stop it, but the ESC key wouldn't respond. With each new number, the environment around me changed. The lights flickered. The floor seemed to change texture, and for a moment, the hospital smelled of fresh disinfectant. It was as if the place were reloading versions of itself in real time. Suddenly, the monitor displayed a static image, my face. I stood in hallway 5B, staring directly into the camera, wearing a white lab coat. The caption below read, "User verified. Restoration complete." I touched the monitor, and the image reacted like water. The surface rippled, reflecting a second version of me, slightly out of phase. A half-second delay, but enough to prove there were two of us. One of us was breathing. The other was just following. I ran to the service elevator, the same one from the original recording. The doors were open, the light on. Inside, a metallic reflection showed the corridor repeating itself endlessly, like one mirror facing another. In the background, I saw someone standing, motionless. When the light flickered, the someone moved, and I realized it was me, only wearing the lab coat. He slowly raised his arm and pointed at me, an almost compassionate gesture as if to warn, "You're too late." And then, the elevator closed by itself. From that moment on, the hospital began to shift position every time I stepped outside. Sometimes it appeared where a store had been, other times in the middle of the road. And whenever I tried to point it out to someone, the building disappeared from the map, leaving only the empty field and the smell of ozone. The entire county seemed to spin around the spot where the hospital should have been, like a disc trying to align itself with an invisible line. And the clock, wherever I was, would go back to 3:41. That night, I noticed my shadow no longer responded to my movements. Sometimes it turned earlier, sometimes later, and when I finally got to sleep, I dreamed about hallway 5B. But in the dream, it was me walking out the door, and the body on the gurney was Elias Monroe. I woke up without remembering how I'd fallen asleep. The motel room wasn't the same. The walls were white, sterile, and there was a constant beeping somewhere out of sight. I thought I was dreaming until I saw the heart monitor to my right, pulsing in sync with the pain in my chest. The name tag on the desk read, "Dr. Elias H. Monroe." The problem was I remembered leaving it at the hospital. The clock on the wall read 3:41, and the second hand was running backward. When I got up, I noticed two shadows on the floor, and one of them wasn't moving. I walked down the hallway and saw nurses passing by, but they all had the same face. Each one seemed a variation on the last, slight differences in expression, like successive frames of the same frame. The air conditioning hummed like a tape rewinding. A nurse handed me a clipboard and said calmly, "You need to sign the discharge, doctor." I looked at the form. Patient's name Daniel H. Lorne. Diagnosis cardiac arrest at 3:17 a.m. Resuscitation at 3:41 a.m. I dropped the pen. The name was mine. I walked down the hallway, but it didn't end. The doors on the right led to the same room, repeated in sequence. In one of them, I found my camera on the floor, still recording. The viewfinder showed the hallway from afar, as if observing me from an impossible perspective. The ambient sound echoed, each footstep returning 2 seconds late. I tried to turn it off, but the camera froze. On the display, the letters flashed. Monroe process restarting. I felt the air change density, as if the building were breathing on its own, readjusting time around me. There were windows, but outside there was nothing. No city, no road, just a gray, homogeneous light, like a simulated cloudy day. And if I stared long enough, I began to see the reflection of another structure superimposed on the landscape. The old hospital, burned, crumbling, coexisting with the restored version. It was as if two realities were trying to occupy the same space. The glass trembled, vibrating with the sound of distant voices, people calling out to me in digitized echoes. Sometimes, amidst the sound, I heard my own voice responding from within the static. I followed the sound to the lower floor. There, the doors were covered with signs bearing familiar names: medical archives, memory restoration, experimental research. I entered the last one. Inside, cables hung from the ceiling like roots. In the center of the room, an ancient terminal displayed a looping line of code. Run, Proc Monroe, restore, memory. Subject, I'd, for one. Beside it, a physical folder sat on the table. Inside were patient reports, all with my face in the photos. Each file corresponded to a different date, but the same event repeated itself. Cardiac arrest at 3:17 a.m., resuscitation at 3:41 a.m. And in each version, the signature at the bottom was mine. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw someone standing in the doorway. It was me, or the copy in the lab coat. He was calm, as if he knew something that shouldn't be said aloud. "The process never failed," he said. "You just shouldn't have seen the other side." His voice was mine, but with a distorted metallic tone. "What is this?" I asked. He smiled. "It's the correction. Every time someone dies prematurely, the system tries to restore continuity. You have been restored, Daniel. Only now there are two versions of you, and only one can persist." The floor vibrated. The lamps began to flicker, alternating between white light and reddish darkness, as if the hospital were shifting between states. The air smelled of ozone and iron. The windows shook with a compressive sound, as if space were folding in on itself. The other version of me began to fade into static, my skin fragmenting into pixels, my body dissolving into the same light I saw in Elias's recording. And as everything went white, I heard the distant sound of a heart monitor. Beep, 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 then silence. I woke up on a stretcher, lying down with an oxygen mask. An elderly man watched me, the same face as Elijah Monroe, but aged. "It took a while," he said. "The system failed in 2013. It's been trying to fix you ever since." I looked around. We were in a windowless room with smooth concrete walls. "Are you real?" I asked. He smiled wearily. "Real is a shaky term." The monitor to my right showed two overlapping traces, two heartbeats out of sync. One stopped. The other continued. He stood, walked over to a control panel and typed something. "The restoration only works if one of the two accepts the erasure," he explained. "The system no longer distinguishes which is the original." The lights dimmed until only the blue glow of the monitor remained. Who was the patient? Who was the doctor? It doesn't matter anymore. I glanced at the name tag on his chest. Dr. Daniel H. Lorne, the name that had been mine. He noticed my gaze and said calmly, "You assumed my identity in the previous restoration. Now it's your turn to return it." The defibrillator's sound began to grow louder, a growing buzz. The image around me distorted, like a VHS tape melting. I saw fragments. The empty hospital, the parking lot, the motel, the flickering reflection. It all converged on a single point, 3:41 a.m. Elias, or the man who used my name, placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Continuity needs you." Then the light flickered and the beeping began again. But only one of the traces flashed on the monitor, and he followed the rhythm of my heart. When I opened my eyes, I was alone on the road. The hospital was gone, the sun was rising. But the name tag in my pocket now read Dr. E. Monroe, and behind it, scrawled in pen, was a sentence. "Process restored, version 4124. The clock on the car's dashboard flashed between 3:41 and 3:42, unable to decide whether time was up or starting over. In the days that followed, I realized the world had become too calm. No wind, no sound of cars, just that electric hum in the background. It was as if reality were on pause, awaiting a decision. I sat in the car reviewing the badge with my changed name. Process restored, version 4124. I began to understand. Each time the system corrected the error, it created a new instance, a new reality. And for some reason, I was the vector of that correction. I wasn't just recording the anomaly. I was the anomaly. I returned to town. Enoch County looked like it was printed on damp paper. The houses were still there, but the windows reflected nothing. People walked in silence, staring at the ground, like projected figures. When I tried to speak to one of them, she responded with random phrases, fragments of dialogue from days past. "You'll recover, doctor. The recording exists, but it shouldn't. The correct time is 3:41. They were echoes, loops of information trying to maintain meaning. I began to think that the restoration process wasn't just affecting the hospital. It was affecting the entire timeline associated with it. I decided to return to the server room. I found it intact, as if it had never been set on fire. The terminal was on, The same prompt on the screen awaiting input. I typed my name, Lorne Daniel 0403, and the system responded, "Subject already restored. Do you wish to merge?" The options flashed yes, no. My hands trembled. I remembered Elias's line, "Continuity needs you." I finally understood that the system was trying to reunite the two halves, the man who died and the man who investigated the case. One would be erased, the other absorbed. As I hesitated, the terminal projected images onto the room's glass. They were recordings of myself at different times. In 2013, filming Corridor 5B. In 2020, reporting the case as a journalist. In 2025, donning the lab coat and conducting the experiment. Each version of me said something different, but they all said the same thing in essence. Don't close the case. Time seemed doubled, all lines converging at a single intersection. 3:41 a.m., that was the fixed point. The knot of error, the seam where reality remade itself. In the corner of the room, I saw a mirror I hadn't remembered being there. My reflection blinked a frame after me as before. Only this time he seemed conscious. He smiled slowly and said quietly, "You understand now." The voice came not from my ears but from inside my head. The program wasn't designed to restore patience. It was designed to restore the world. But it needs an anchor point, someone to remember, someone to record. And then he added, "You were designed to remember." I remembered the full name from the original report. Elias H. Monroe, age 52, heart failure, 3:17 a.m. But he also remembered the signature on the doctor's badge, Dr. Elias H. Monroe. It was the same man, registered twice as a patient and as a professional. And slowly, I realized what this meant. The Proc Monroe program wasn't about him. It was about replicating the mind of the deceased into the one who recorded it. The doctor recorded the patient's death, and the system confused them. It restored both, in me. The voices on the speakers began to overlap, multiple versions of me narrating the same phrases in different order. Time is a circuit. Death is a reboot. The observer and the observed are the same process. Each word resonated within the walls like system commands. The cables vibrated. The lights flashed in sync with my pulse. The floor expanded, as if the building were breathing, each inhale bringing new versions of the place. I felt the weight of all 4,123 previous iterations, lives that never remembered they were being repeated. I tried to stop the program, but the enter key wouldn't work. Then a line of text appeared by itself. Merge initiated, do not interrupt. The mirror behind me lit up, transforming into a screen. On it, Corridor 5B appeared one last time. Elias or I walked toward the exit door. Only now someone was behind the camera. The image shook, the focus adjusted, and I saw clearly who was holding the camera. Me. It was always me. Each recording was a reminder of my own attempt to prove my existence. The heartbeat on the monitor accelerated, and the surrounding light distorted like fabric being pulled. The sensation was of being sucked into one's own reflection, as if the mirror were a file opening to overwrite. For an instant I felt each version of myself, the journalist, the doctor, the patient, superimposed. None of them original, all restored, and the next moment, the screen went black. In the darkness I heard only my own voice, but in echoes, coming from multiple directions. There is no longer a difference between those who record and those who are recorded. And then the beeping sound returned, regular, steady, like a clock starting over. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize, but whose smell was familiar. The same disinfectant from the hospital. A tape recorder was playing on the table, playing my own voice, describing exactly what I was seeing at that moment. The recording ended with the words, "And now he realizes he's woken up in a room he doesn't recognize but whose smell is familiar." The audio started playing on its own. The sound was slightly delayed, but perfectly synchronized with me. I realized then that I wasn't hearing the past. I was hearing the present repeating itself. I opened the door and found Corridor 5B. Only this time there was no difference between the old and the new. Everything seemed stabilized, polished, with steady, flawless lights. Yet the air had an impossible density, as if time had weight. The windows showed the same gray, horizonless landscape. I walked slowly, listening to the electrical hum that seemed to come from within the walls. At the end of the corridor, a new sign. Monroe Restoration Complete, System Stable. The clock above it read 3:41 and stopped. I found a mirror at the end of the hallway, larger than before. There were two versions of me reflected, one with the lab coat, the other with the camera. They moved in perfect sync until the one in the lab coat smiled. "Now you understand," he said soundlessly. There was no mistake in the recording. The mistake was the one watching. I tried to speak, but my voice came out late, echoing from inside the glass. It was my turn to be the reflection, and I realized, horrified, that the one holding the camera was now him, the reflection. I was the one recorded. The wall around the mirror began to dissolve, revealing hundreds of monitors. On each one, I saw versions of myself walking down the same hallway, at different times in different clothes. Some in lab coats, some in suits, some in ruins, all headed in the same direction, the exit. Each time someone reached the door, the image froze and returned to the beginning. The cycle never ended. The system never terminated the process, only restarted. And then I realized the meaning of the word restore, not to revive. To repeat, the room's speaker crackled. A voice, mine but older, began to speak. The Monroe program was not a medical project. It was an attempt to correct localized time gaps after the death of conscious observers. The body is merely the support. The goal is to preserve the continuity of perception. The voice paused, but perception cannot exist without a fixed point. Each restoration creates a copy that believes itself to be the original, and then calmly, you are the copy. I fell to my knees. Everything around me trembled with luminous pulses, like the inside of a massive server. The hospital was a time containment machine, and I was the loop. The air grew dense, vibrant, filled with fragments of voices, repetitions of myself, echoes of previous versions whispering in unison. Still 3:41. Still 3:41. I looked at my hands. They were transparent, crisscrossed with blue lines of code, like biological circuits. The sensation wasn't of dying, but of being archived. The hallway lights began to turn off in sequence. Each time one went out, part of the memory disappeared with it. The motel, the car, the notes, the name Daniel. Only the process remained, the act of recording. I felt the urge to speak out loud, to leave one last record before the complete erasure. I picked up the recorder and said, "If anyone finds this, don't try to restore it. The error isn't the file, it's the observer. Every attempt to correct the past reproduces it." The sound of the tape playing was identical to the sound of my heart. At the end of the hallway, the exit door stood open. The light coming from outside wasn't white or yellow. It was the color of absence, like looking into a switched-off mirror. I walked toward it, each step echoing louder, until I realized the echo preceded the sound. Time was running backward. As I touched the doorknob, I heard one last voice, my own coming from within the recording. The footage shouldn't exist, but it does, and I'm in it. The light swallowed me. The tape recorder fell to the floor and continued spinning. For a few seconds, it still picked up noises, the ticking of a clock, the distant sound of an elevator, and a solitary beep that marked the end of a cycle. Then silence. The tape continued spinning, even without sound, until the counter reached 3:41 and froze. And then, as with every previous version, the video started again. The same hallway, the same shadow, the same man walking toward the exit. Only this time there was no one holding the camera. The image flickered, dissolved into static, and the digital counter blinked for the last time. 41, 03, 41, 03, 41. Ricard. The tape ends before I even hit record.